the rigmarole of pop music.
Yes, well, it just happens, you know. It's hard to get away from it.
Of course, but it may be a naive question, but with all the success, the enormous...
You know that feeling when an ABBA song comes on the radio, and you are instantly transported back to a moment in your life. For millions of fans around the world, that voice belongs to one woman with a soft Swedish accent, who could break your heart in less than 3 minutes.
Well, some years has gone, and I have also done, after ABBA, I have done several solo records.
And was the voice okay?
To start with, it was a bit rusty. I could feel.
But behind those perfect harmonies, Agnetha Fältskog was hiding moments that would shock even her most loyal followers. The return nobody saw coming. On the 26th of May, 2022, something happened in East London that millions of ABBA fans had stopped allowing themselves to dream about. Inside a custom-built arena at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, all 4 members of ABBA walked the red carpet together, including Benny Andersson, Björn Ulvaeus, Frida Lindstad, and yes, Agnetha Fältskog herself. For the first time in nearly half a century, the 4 of them stood side by side in public, smiling at fans who could barely process what they were seeing. If you grew up listening to ABBA, you can probably remember exactly where you were when you first heard the news that the band was coming back. What unfolded inside that arena was something stranger and more beautiful than any farewell tour could have offered. Digital versions of the band, recreated to look like they did in 1979, appeared on stage with a 10-piece live band behind them. The technology was so detailed that Industrial Light and Magic, the company famous for Star Wars, had spent 5 weeks placing tracking dots on the faces of 4 people in their 70s. Agnetha had agreed to wear a motion capture suit at age 70, dancing in front of cameras so the world could one day see her young self perform again. She admitted later that she was suspicious of the whole idea at first. In an interview with NME, she said the concept made her nervous until she actually saw the demos in person. Once the technology convinced her, she said the recording sessions themselves felt joyful in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The album that came with the show, called Voyage, debuted at #1 in 17 countries and sold 1 million units in its first week alone. Universal Music in the United Kingdom watched their pre-order record fall as fans flooded in. Then, on the 21st of March, 2024, something even more remarkable happened in Stockholm. King Carl XVI Gustaf of Sweden appointed all 4 ABBA members as Commanders First Class of the Royal Order of Vasa. This was a level of national recognition that had not been bestowed on anyone outside the Swedish royal family for almost 50 years. The reluctant pop star from Jönköping had quietly become national royalty. Today, Agnetha lives where she has always wanted to live, on her farm on Eckerö Island, just outside Stockholm. Her son Christian lives nearby with his family, and her daughter Linda also lives on the same island. She has 4 grandchildren, 2 dogs, and the horses she has loved since she was a girl. Her estimated net worth sits at around 200 million United States dollars, though anyone who has read her interviews knows that money was never the thing she truly wanted. In 2023, she did something fans never thought they would hear again. She released a brand new song called Where Do We Go From Here, which premiered on Zoe Ball's BBC Radio 2 breakfast show on the 31st of August. The same year, on the 13th of October, she released A+, a complete reimagining of her 2013 solo album. She was 73 years old and writing music again, on her own terms, in her own home, with no plane tickets to book and no screaming crowds to face. And yet, sitting in her quiet kitchen at 75, watching her grandchildren run through the same fields she once rode horses through, you would never guess how loud the silence had been before all of this began. The album that broke 17 years of silence. For 17 long years, between 1987 and 2004, Agnetha released no new music at all. She turned down nearly every interview request that landed on her desk. She rarely left her property on Eckerö Island. The British tabloids called her a recluse, the Garbo of pop music, the woman who walked away from the world. She hated every single label they pinned on her. Then, in 2004, she did something almost no one expected. She released an album called My Coloring Book, a collection of cover songs from the 1960s that had shaped her as a teenager. The lead single was a Cilla Black cover called If I Thought You'd Ever Change Your Mind, which climbed to number 11 on the United Kingdom singles chart. This was higher than any solo single she had ever released in Britain. What most fans did not realize was why those particular songs. In an interview around that time, she admitted that the album was a nostalgia trip into the music of her teenage years. She said she loved the sad songs, and that when she was a teenager, she would actually cry along with them. Anyone who has ever lost themselves in a creative silence will recognize the courage it took for her to step back into the world after so long. The album was less a comeback and more a quiet conversation with her younger self, the girl from Jönköping, who used to sing along to Connie Francis and Dusty Springfield records. But the real shock came 9 years later. On the 13th of May, 2013, she released a fully original album simply called A. It was produced by Swedish hitmaker Jörgen Elofsson and contained her first original song in nearly 3 decades, a haunting track called I Keep Them on the Floor Beside My Bed. The album reached number 6 on the United Kingdom chart, her highest solo position ever in that country. It sold over 600,000 copies in its first 2 months. There was even a duet with Gary Barlow of Take That, called I Should Have Followed You Home, which the two actually recorded separately because she was on holiday during his session. What made her come back was something she had been quietly preparing for. In a conversation with the Sun newspaper, she finally addressed the recluse label that had followed her for decades. She said she had been the black sheep of ABBA, that the others were more social, and that she did not enjoy parties. But she insisted the dramatic stories about her hiding away were exaggerated. She had needed time, and she had needed silence. She had not been hiding so much as she had been recovering from something she could not yet name in public. Then, on the 12th of November, 2013, she walked onto a stage at the Hammersmith Apollo in London for the BBC Children in Need Rocks concert. She duetted with Gary Barlow on I Should Have Followed You Home. It was her first live performance in 25 years. A whole generation of fans, including people who had been born after ABBA broke up, finally saw her sing in person. Those who watched her step back into the spotlight saw a woman who looked at peace. The truth was that this peace had been built on top of something terrible, that she had kept secret from almost everyone, including her own authorized biographer, for an entire decade. The secret she kept from her own biographer. There was something Agnetha Fältskog refused to talk about for 10 full years, even with the man who was writing her authorized biography. When Carl Magnus Palm was researching his book, Bright Lights, Dark Shadows, in the mid-1990s, the family told him only that her mother had died in some kind of accident. The truth was, something nobody outside the family would learn for another full decade. In 1994, Agnetha's mother, Birgit, jumped from the 6th-floor balcony of the apartment she shared with her husband, Ingvar, in Jönköping. Birgit had been struggling for years. According to a family friend who later spoke to the Daily Mirror, Agnetha's father, Ingvar, had a long history of heavy drinking, and the marriage had been quietly falling apart for some time. Birgit had grown more and more depressed. When she finally took her own life, the woman who had once raised the most famous blonde in Sweden was gone in a single instant. Anyone who has lost a parent knows that grief does not arrive in tidy little waves. Agnetha was devastated in a way that almost nothing in her career had prepared her for. She could not comprehend that her mother would take such a step. As well as feeling the loss, she was frightened. The tragedy now ran through her own family line. It was a shadow that would not lift easily. She withdrew further into her farm on Ekero, into the quiet woods and the horses and the small daily rituals that kept her steady. Then, less than a year later, in 1995, her father Ingvar passed away in a care home. She had now lost both parents in less than 12 months. She later told Micro Gids magazine that it had been awful and that you wonder if there was anything you could have done. Within a year of losing her mother, her father was gone too. She slipped into a deep clinical depression that lasted years. What is remarkable, and what fans never knew at the time, is that her 2004 comeback album My Coloring Book was already being shaped by all of this grief. The covers she chose, the sad songs of her teenage years, the album she described as a nostalgia trip into the music of her youth, were all connected to a quiet attempt to reach backwards toward the mother and father she had lost. One friend told the Daily Mirror that it was very telling she had chosen songs from her own youth for her first album in 17 years. She did not officially speak about her mother's death in public until well over a decade later. In a Swedish television interview, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge what had happened. She did not give the details, but she did allow the world to know that something terrible had taken place. She said it had taken her years just to begin processing it, and that the loss had felt unbearable in a way she could not put into words. For years before this tragedy, fans had wondered why she seemed so withdrawn, why she avoided the press, why she so rarely attended public events. The truth was that the woman the world saw as a reluctant celebrity was carrying a weight that no celebrity should ever have to carry alone. She was the daughter of a woman who had jumped, and the daughter of a father who had then faded away in the months that followed. What very few people knew at the time was that during this same grieving period, a stranger had been quietly building a life on her island for one very specific reason that had nothing to do with her music. The man who climbed her fence on Christmas Eve. The world thought it knew Agnetha Fältskog during these reclusive years. The world was wrong about something dangerous. In the late 1990s, while she was supposedly hiding from the public on her quiet island farm, she was being followed, watched, and contacted by a Dutch forklift driver named Gert van der Graaf. The story of what he did to her and what she briefly chose to do with him is one of the strangest and most uncomfortable chapters in the entire ABBA story. Van der Graaf had been obsessed with Agnetha since he was 8 years old, watching ABBA perform Waterloo on Dutch television. He grew up dreaming about her. As an adult, he moved from the Netherlands to Sweden specifically to be near her. He bought a house on Ekero, the same island where she lived. He wrote her a letter from a hospital bed after an accident, and somehow, in 1997, she actually visited him. What happened next is something fans still find hard to believe. She entered into a relationship with him for around 2 years. He was 16 years younger than her. She later told the Solna District Court that his attention had been so intense and so persistent that after a while she felt she could not resist anymore. She wanted to know who he was. She wanted to understand the man who had been writing to her for so long. In an interview with the Daily Mail, he once admitted that he had fallen in love with her while watching Waterloo as a child, and that being with her had been his dream his whole life. She ended the relationship in September of 1999. That is when everything turned dark. He began sending letters by the dozen. Swedish reports counted 86 letters in the period after the breakup, with broader counts mentioning over 300 letters across the entire affair. He called her phone 1 to 3 times a day. He followed her around the island. She wrote him a stern letter saying she wanted to be left alone, that there was no hope for them, and that she did not want any more letters and nothing else. On Christmas Eve, 1999, he climbed onto her property. He had passed through her security equipment to get there. Police arrested him on the spot. If you have ever felt afraid of someone, even just for a moment, then you can understand on some small level what those years must have been like for her. The case went to the Solna District Court on the 11th of October, 2000. Agnetha arrived at the back entrance just before 10 in the morning, dressed in a green sweater and black pants. She asked the court to place him in a separate room, and they agreed. She asked for a closed courtroom, and they refused. Then she stood up and said something nobody in the room would ever forget. She said her life had become very restricted, that she did not dare go outdoors, that she feared for her own life and her children's lives. She also said that he had described their relationship as being like Romeo and Juliet, but that, to her, it felt much more like Jekyll and Hyde. The court found him guilty of gross violation of privacy. He received a suspended sentence, a fine, and a 2-year ban from Sweden. He was, in essence, deported from her country. But the story did not end there. He came back in 2003. He came back again on the 5th of April, 2006, which happened to be her 56th birthday. Even in 2023, an Amazon Prime documentary featured him on camera, calmly saying that for him, the story was not yet over. What very few fans realized was that the reason Eckerö had become her fortress in the first place had everything to do with 2 near-death moments inside vehicles she could not control: the tornado and the bus that broke her trust. By the autumn of 1979, ABBA was at the peak of its powers. The band had just released the Voulez-Vous album. The North American tour was selling out arenas. Agnetha was 29 years old and supposed to be living the dream. Then one night, somewhere between New York and Boston, her private plane flew straight into a tornado. The aircraft, which had reportedly once been owned by the legendary aviator Howard Hughes, was running low on fuel. The pilot attempted to land, but was unable to bring the aircraft down safely. The plane circled around for a second attempt and missed the runway again. By the third try, the cabin had descended into full panic. The pilot eventually made an emergency landing in Manchester, New Hampshire, and the band arrived 90 minutes late for the Boston Music Hall show. The next scheduled performance in Washington, D.C. had to be canceled entirely because Agnetha was in no condition to continue. If you have ever been on a flight that hit serious turbulence, you can imagine how that experience would change you. For years afterwards, she stopped flying altogether. Bjorn, Benny, and Frida traveled together to events and photo shoots, and Agnetha stayed home. Photographs began appearing of the other 3 without her. The press started calling her the recluse of ABBA, a label that would haunt her for the next 40 years. She finally went into therapy to try to manage the phobia. She told The Sun she could fly for 2 or 3 hours now, but no longer than that. If the tornado had been the first hammer blow, the second one came 4 years later. On the 2nd of October, 1983, she was traveling home from England on a coach in Sweden. The driver lost control of the vehicle. The bus rolled over on a Swedish motorway. According to multiple reports from the time, including a 1983 Bravo magazine account, Agnetha was thrown from the window during the crash. By some miracle, nobody died. She spent the night in a hospital. 2 weeks later, she appeared on Swedish television's Måndagsbörsen program, interviewed by Jonas Hallgren, and afterwards held an unscheduled press conference saying she should never have agreed to the interview because she was not yet recovered. The same night, she filed lawsuits against 2 Swedish tabloids that had written about the crash without her permission. She said something that fans still repeat today. She said she must have a guardian angel looking after her because she had experienced terrible luck but had somehow survived. These 2 incidents, together, the tornado flight and the rollover crash, hardened something inside her. She had already started pulling back from the public eye. She had already begun saying no to long tours and refusing to be away from her children for more than 2 weeks at a time. Now, on top of everything, she could not even safely travel between continents anymore. The world she had once promised to conquer with her voice was becoming smaller by the year. The cruel irony was that all of this was happening just as her marriage was falling apart on the world stage. While she was being thrown from a bus and dragged through the sky in a tornado plane, her former husband, Bjorn, was writing songs about their divorce, handing them to her to sing, and watching her perform them in front of millions of people who had no idea that any of it was real. The studio session where she sang her own divorce. Among everything Agnetha Fältskog has ever recorded, one song stands above all the others. She has said so herself in multiple interviews. The song is "The Winner Takes It All." What very few fans realize is that the moment she recorded it was one of the most emotionally devastating moments of her entire career, and she had to perform it less than 2 weeks after her actual divorce became legal. The marriage between Agnetha and Bjorn Ulvaeus had been in trouble for years. They had separated in January of 1979, and the divorce was finalized in July of 1980. Through all of it, ABBA kept working. They kept touring. They kept smiling at the cameras. They told the press, as Agnetha later admitted in her memoir, that it was a happy divorce. She said that this had, of course, been a complete front. The Winner Takes It All was written by Bjorn during the summer of 1980 on the small Swedish island of Vigsö, where the band often retreated to write. Benny had composed the music with him on a Sunday night. Bjorn took the backing tape home and drank whiskey while writing the lyrics in about 1 hour. He later told the London Times that the song was the experience of a divorce, although he insisted it was technically fiction. He said there was no winner or loser in their case. He said that usually it was not a good idea to write while drunk, but that night the words simply came. By the time he wrote the line about the gods throwing their dice, the bottle was empty. Then came the studio session that has become legendary in ABBA history. On the 2nd of June, 1980, at Polar Music Studios in Stockholm, Bjorn handed Agnetha a handwritten sheet of lyrics. Sound engineer Michael B. Trito started the backing track. Agnetha began to sing the words her former husband had just written about their marriage. Imagine being asked to sing about your own breakup while your former husband stood in the same room watching you. Bjorn later said that a tear or two welled up in her eyes during the session because the words really affected her. Agnetha herself has spoken about that day many times. She has called it the best of all ABBA songs. She said the lyrics were deeply personal and the music was unsurpassed. She said singing it was like acting a part and that she could not let her feelings take over. She admitted it took her quite a while afterwards to realize that they had created what she described as a small masterpiece. The music video was filmed in Marstrand on the Swedish west coast on the 12th of July, 1980, just 10 days after the divorce became legal. The director was Lasse Hallström, the same filmmaker who would later be nominated for an Academy Award for The Cider House Rules. Both Bjorn and Agnetha brought their new partners with them to the shoot. The video took 5 hours to film. The single was released on the 21st of July and became their biggest hit in years. What is almost unbearable to consider is that this was not even the first song Bjorn had written about their crumbling marriage. Knowing Me, Knowing You had been recorded in 1976, 3 full years before the official separation was ever announced. Bjorn admitted in Bright Lights, Dark Shadows that this song had also come from the unsettling personal situation at the time. For years before fans knew anything was wrong, the lyrics had been quietly telling them the truth. And the cruelest part was that all of this fame, all of this exposure, all of this lyrical truth-telling had begun with one single night on a stage in Brighton 5 years earlier. The jumpsuit and the headline that followed her forever. Long before the tornado, the bus crash, the divorce, and the stalker. There was a moment in 1974 that changed Agnetha Fältskog's life forever. It happened in a place called Brighton, on the southern coast of England. The event was the Eurovision Song Contest. The song was Waterloo. The stage outfit included a blue and silver knickerbocker costume that has since become one of the most recognizable images in pop music history. ABBA won the contest that night on the 6th of April, 1974. Their daughter Linda was just over a year old, back at home in Sweden. In 2005, Waterloo would be voted the greatest song in Eurovision history at the contest's 50th anniversary celebration. But in that exact moment in 1974, Agnetha had no idea that her life was about to be turned inside out. She later said that winning was supposed to be the most fantastic thing, but that it brought problems too. Her daughter was so young. Everybody wanted them everywhere. It felt really bad leaving Linda behind, even though good people were always taking care of her. What followed Eurovision was a level of attention that the band had simply not been prepared for. The famous white jumpsuit moment came during ABBA's 1977 Australian tour, which was filmed for the documentary ABBA the Movie. Agnetha performed in a tight white outfit that caught the eye of every photographer in the country. An Australian newspaper ran a headline that fans still quote today. The headline read, "Agnetha's bottom tops dull show." At the press conference the very next day, she responded with the dry humor that nobody knew she had. She looked at the reporters and said, "Don't they have bottoms in Australia?" That same year, she was officially voted the sexiest bottom in Europe. Many of us know what it feels like to be reduced to one thing when we know we are so much more than that. The wider ABBA team, in particular manager Stig Anderson, leaned into this image. Photographs began placing her in the front of the group. Posters emphasized her looks. She has said many times that she truly disdained this role. She did not want to be a pinup. She wanted to be a singer. In her memoir, As I Am, she described how her professional persona never loosened its grip and how it kept an eye on her at every single moment. Inside the band, she became known among the others as Cranky Agnetha. She negotiated with Stig Anderson that no tour could last longer than 2 weeks. She had a young daughter at home and refused to be away from her for any longer than that. The others thought she was being difficult. She has admitted in interviews that toward the end of the touring years, she could no longer step on stage without first having a whiskey. She said it was terribly frightening when fans were pounding on her car, when the screams from boiling crowds felt closer to rage than to love. She also confessed something quieter and more painful in a 2014 interview with Micro Gids. She said it was strange to sing the lyric that called her the girl with golden hair all the time when she did not feel that way at all. She said she had been less confident than the others, and so the very same image that made Agnetha Fältskog one of the most recognizable women on the planet was also the cage she would spend the next 40 years quietly trying to step out of, until one day in 2022, when she finally walked away from it on her own terms. Which one of these moments left you the most speechless about Agnetha? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know which part of her story hit you the hardest.